All right, back on the conversation. Are they ever going to get Donald Trump on his issue with fraud, taxes, etc.? Is he going to be charged? Is he going to be convicted? Is he going to be in jail? Let's talk about it. David K. Johnston is joining us. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter. He's the one that broke the story about Donald Trump's 2005 tax returns. And he's also the co-founder of DCReport.org. David, good to have you back.
Glad to be with you, Cenk.
Absolutely. All right, so if you were the prosecutor, David, what would be the top charge that you would go after Trump on?
Well, if I'm a New York State prosecutor, the grand jury in Manhattan, it would be New York State racketeering, Article 460 of the New York State Penal Code. It requires showing 3 underlying felony crimes. Finding a felony by Donald Trump and the Trump Organization is about as hard as finding a pedestrian in Midtown Manhattan. And that allows you to bring in all sorts of activity, lying on tax returns, lying to banks, lying to insurance companies, falsifying documents. It's a very strong law patterned after the federal law. And I think that's where a charge should be brought.
So the racketeering is to indicate that it's a overall criminal enterprise, and
Right.
And that's the umbrella under which all the different crimes rest. Is that a fair way of describing it?
Exactly the way to put it. It's an umbrella statute, and it allows you to bring in all sorts of misconduct and illegal behavior and package it that way. And Donald claims, Cenk, to be the greatest expert in the history of the world on taxes. I'm an actually recognized around the world expert on taxes. He doesn't know anything about them. And if he were just hit with a tax charge, his lawyers would say, well, Mr. Trump was just puffing. He was just trying to build up his reputation. And he doesn't know anything about taxes. He just did what the tax advisors told him to do. So bringing a straight tax charge, I think, would be unwise. Lots of people who are criminally prosecuted get off, and we hardly prosecute anybody in this country anymore for tax crimes. There are about 500 convictions a year in a country with over 330 million people.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So now I am afraid to ask you, what does it look like they're going to charge him with?
Well, at the moment, it looks like the Manhattan DA is not going to do anything. This is a very surprising development. Cyrus Vance, who was the elected district attorney, had hired Mark Pomerantz, who is the expert on RICO federal. He used it as a prosecutor. He used it as a defense lawyer. He literally wrote the book on it. And he and another seasoned prosecutor, Kerry Dunn, quit after the new district attorney, Alvin Bragg, indicated he didn't believe they had a case. Now, subsequent to their resignations on principle, the New York Times has done a very interesting story by reporters I used to work with when I was at the Times that suggests the case they were building was heavily based around false statements to banks. You make a false statement on your credit card application or your mortgage loan, that's a crime or can be a crime. And I was kind of surprised that it was so narrow. Now, the Times reporters may not have gotten the full flavor of this, but there's lots of broader issues you can bring up with Donald Trump in a criminal charge. He has asserted, for example, that a property he said under oath as president was worth more than 50 million and repeatedly said in public was worth over 100 million, was only worth $1.3 million. There are other properties he owns where he told property tax authorities they were worth about about a 16th of what he told the tax authorities. Those kinds of discrepancies are badges of fraud. And he falsified, no doubt, insurance applications, both for claims and for coverage. And of course, there is the existing criminal case against the Trump Organization and its chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg, for not reporting about $1.8 million of benefits. And Trump and his lawyers have not denied the charges. They've simply said, oh, it's not much money. Nobody gets prosecuted for this. If you are an American worker at the median wage you will work 40 years to earn $1.8 million.
Yeah. So, David, there's so many issues to suss out here. So, first of all, if they don't go after Trump on these things, we're saying one thing to the IRS and saying another in order to get loans, doesn't it basically say to every business person in America, don't worry about it, just lie. Lie on your taxes, lie on your loan applications. There are no consequences at all. If you're rich in America, you're definitely going to get away with it.
I think that's exactly the message that's being sent. And look, we have a fundamental problem in America that we have very weak white collar crime laws. I just taught my students at Syracuse University College of Law. I'm not a lawyer, but I've taught there for many years about how weak our white collar crime laws, how they're full of all sorts of defenses and excuses. And it's one of the reasons we're seeing so much criminality at the top of this country that I've been writing about and documenting for several decades. In addition, the IRS is so strapped for money that they can barely process tax returns. They're having trouble taking in the money. Never mind complicated cases of going after people. Now, Trump is not off the hook if the Manhattan case dies, because the New York State Attorney General, who's elected, has a civil case against him and has filed papers making it clear that they found at least 6 areas of civil fraud, 7 areas, and they're working on more. The Westchester County District Attorney, that's just north of Manhattan, Mimi Rocha, who was a longtime federal prosecutor for the federal government in Manhattan, has a criminal investigation over his property tax statements, like the property I mentioned that he says is worth $100 million, but he told property tax people it's only worth $1.3 million. The Attorney General of the District of Columbia, Carl Racine, has a case over the $107 million raised by the Presidential Inaugural Committee for Trump's inauguration, which was more than double what Obama had raised, and yet it was a very skimpy little affair. It's hard to imagine how they spent more than $25 or $30 million. And in my current book, The Big Cheat, I have a whole chapter about how the Trump people tried to take money off the books, which would be a crime, presumably Russian money or Russian-friendly money. And then finally, there's a special grand jury just approved by a judge in Georgia for the Fulton County DA, Fannie Willis, into Trump's threats against Brad Raffensperger if he didn't undo the Georgia election results and declare him the winner. So Trump has other problems coming, and he should be under investigation by the US Justice Department. But I think it's pretty clear at this point that Merrick Garland, Biden's attorney general, really would rather not open the can of worms of a federal administration going after a previous president. I think he'd rather see the states do this work for him.
All right, well, David, what I'm worried about is nobody's actually going to charge him, and they're going to let him get away with a lifetime of criminality. So the Justice Department basically protecting Biden and all corrupt Democrats not doing anything is obvious, and it's what every Democratic administration does. They say absurd things like, we don't look backward, we look forward. I'm sure every criminal in America would love to hear that. I haven't heard of any crimes in the future yet, but they're usually in the past. So that's not surprising. Now the Manhattan DA looks like they're throwing in the towel, and the New York State Attorney General is just doing civil lawsuits. For God's sake, is he ever going to be charged? But more importantly than that, David, because it seems like maybe they'll do it in Georgia, in the description you just described here, but none on the real problems, which are money. But then that leads you to the question of why? Why won't anyone charge him? What is wrong with them?
Well, to be fair to Donald, who I've covered now for almost 34 years, he's far from unique. There are lots of big league white collar criminals, CEOs of major corporations who I've written about, who do all sorts of illegal things, and we don't go after them. We have 2 systems of justice in America, one for street crimes. So, for example, the US Supreme Court held that a California man, a petty thief his whole life, who stole 9 videos from a Walmart in Southern California, to give his children something at Christmas because he was broke, got 55 years in prison, and the US Supreme Court called that a reasonable sentence and upheld it. On the other hand, we see news all the time about major Wall Street figures, investors, business people who engage in blatant frauds and deceptions, and nothing happens. And look at when Daryl Gates, who I covered as police chief of LA 40 years ago and was exposing him, Daryl used to say, that there were prominent LA people, brand name people in various businesses who were up to their eyeballs in the cocaine trafficking business, but they never brought a case against any of those people. He just complained and asserted they exist. We're too focused on street crime. We're too focused on the person who robs a bodega and not enough on people who do horrible economic damage. And I would have told you, Cenk, up until the resignation of these two prosecutors, that the Manhattan DA was absolutely going to indict Donald Trump. I'm floored that it appears that he's not doing so. And an obvious question is, why did he back off? Vanity Fair wrote a piece calling him a bagman, suggesting there's some unsavory background that people didn't check out before he was elected. I don't know about the depth of that. I just know Vanity Fair wouldn't have reported it without some substance. But at the moment, I think it's less likely he's going to be nailed on charges he richly deserves. I mean, I've written 3 books documenting his criminal behavior. And if it was a lesser person, if we had a society that actually had equal justice under law, hey, Donald Trump would have been prosecuted a long time ago. He should have been prosecuted when he forged his own tax return and his accountant revealed that in testimony in a trial. He should have been jailed when he involved himself in multiple sales tax crimes in New York that Mayor Ed Koch said back in the day he should get 15 days in jail for, or when his casinos were giving liquor, limousines, credit lines in one case, and hotel suites to 13 and 14-year-old gamblers in Atlantic City. But we don't pursue white-collar crime. So if you're willing to take the risk, that's a great new career opportunity.
No, it's not, because your boss will definitely end all of your cases. Because the further up you go, the more corrupt they are and the more cowardly they are. Every prosecutor that doesn't, we don't want anybody prosecuted on crimes they didn't commit. That's crazy. We don't want any piece of that. But all of his crimes are public. We can all see them.
Right. No, I'm sorry, Cenk, if I wasn't clear. That's exactly my point. There's a robust record of Donald Trump committing many crimes, swindling people on his Trump University, swindling people on his never-built Baja resort. He's done this again and again and again, and with clear criminal intent. He's just not unique. Yeah. We have a system where we don't go after high-level white-collar crimes. Part of that is because of the structure of our politics, but another part of it is that the white-collar crime laws we have are full of weaknesses, loopholes.
Right.
We don't devote much money to it, and they're complicated and difficult to explain to juries.
Yeah, no, that's BS. I can explain it super clearly. And it's that people like,
that doesn't mean all of them are.
Yeah, I got you. But Alvin Bragg's a coward at a minimum. Merrick Garland's a coward at a minimum.
I agree with you.
Okay, so last 2 things. No, I know you agree, David. Last 2 things real quick. So Letitia James, is she full of crap? I mean, I don't care about civil lawsuits at all. At all. I know, wow, we'll bankrupt him. No, you won't. He'll just raise another $200 million from the suckers that are the Republican voters. So is she gonna do anything criminal, or is she full of crap too?
Well, under New York law, Letitia James only has inherent civil authority. Now, what she can do is go to Governor Kathy Hochul or Alvin Bragg and say, grant me criminal authority.
They're not gonna do that, they're cowards.
Really the question journalists should be pressing her with, why don't you ask for criminal authority, and then, which is very simple and easy to do, and then you take over the Manhattan DA's case?
Well, that would be great, but I would be shocked if Hochul wasn't also a coward. And Bragg has already said, I'm a loser and I shouldn't be in this role. I'm not gonna prosecute rich people. So that's obvious, and so he's not gonna do it. This is disgusting. It's disgusting what happens in America with the powerful.
Yep.
Last thing, I always had hope that the semi-obvious money laundering he did for the Russians was going to also lead to criminal charges. That seems like that is a hope that is long, long gone. I mean, his kids said it in public. We got all our money from the Russians. You got all the Deutsche Bank connections, all the things that you see play out that are clear and obvious context clues, etc. But if you did this, one, did the statute of limitations run out on those? And two, if they haven't, is there any prayer, or they're just gonna be like, oh yeah, we know he worked with the Russians, but we want to prosecute him on things we got him debt to rights on? You think we're gonna do that?
Yeah, I think there are many crimes involving the Russians that Donald Trump could be pursued for. If you do it under a RICO statute with a conspiracy, then as long as the conspiracy continues, you can bring that charge. The statute of limitations doesn't run out. Tax fraud, like murder, has no, criminal tax fraud, like murder, has no statute of limitations. So there are ways to go after Donald Trump, but you've hit upon the real fundamental problem. Members of Congress are beholden not to their voters, but to donors, many times donors who don't live in the district or even the state that they represent. We have institutionalized corruption, and the Supreme Court, in a series of decisions, has basically made it clear that the traditional bribery and extortion statutes that were used on politicians aren't going to be usable anymore unless you can show blatant, oh yeah, I'll give you this money, you'll take this action. Anything short of that, the Supreme Court has basically said, not a crime. This is the fundamental serious problem we have in this country, combined with corporations, which are very useful devices for encouraging people to take risk and manage assets, are evolving in the law from creatures of the state we created to benefit society into our masters. And those two problems, identifying by those in power with the rich and powerful and depending on them for campaign donations, and these changes in the law that are allowing corporations to do all sorts of things that they weren't allowed to do as recently as 50 years ago, those two things are really damaging our democracy. And I much as I write about them and talk about them, I will tell you I've had about this much success in getting the public to take up an interest in it.
Yeah, well, that's not your fault, David. It's mainstream media, which is the #1 protectors of corporate rule and corruption in this country. So that's why issues that enrage Americans get no coverage at all on television or in a lot of print, under the guise that they would be boring. They're not at all boring. Corruption is what drives.
They get presented in the way like Wall Street will be criticized, but only in the way Wall Street wants to be criticized.
Yeah,
they're perfectly willing to be criticized, but not on the things that matter. And that's, my goodness, my former newspaper, the New York Times, has a columnist who rose to influence by saying, the real victims of the 2008 economic collapse, that was the poor people on Wall Street. They were the victims.
Yeah,
it's just atrocious.
It's absolute corruption through and through. All right, the things you can do about it, wolf-pac.com. Wolfpack is trying to get an actual amendment and through the states and not through the corrupt Congress. You can do it that way. The audience should, everyone in the watching this should check that out, wolf-pac.com. You should also check out the great reporting by David K. Johnston at dcreport.org. You should check out all of his books, where he clearly lays out the case against Donald Trump and his criminality. And by the way, if you're a prosecutor in this country, maybe you should buy his books and take a lesson or two. It ain't that hard if you actually wanted to hold people accountable, but unfortunately our prosecutors are also deeply corrupt in the pockets of the rich in this country. All right, David K. Johnston, thank you for joining us, we appreciate it.
Thank you, Jay.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.